listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined once again with my friend Philip Clift. For this episode, we will be continuing our discussion on C.W. Leadbeater's book, The Chakras. This will be the second of a two-part series. So if you haven't checked out the first episode, go ahead and listen to that now so that this episode makes a little bit more sense. So welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming back out.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really was. And this one's going to be even more dense, so we'll see. So to start off, we talked about the chakras a lot in the last one. So let's dive into how do the chakras interact with the etheric double?
Okay. I think it's important to first talk about the subtle bodies as presented in modern yoga information. So the etheric double relates to what are known as the koshas in tantric yoga. So there are 5 of those, and they're considered sheaths or divisions of the same body, just at varying levels of energetic subtlety. So the physical body is, or what's known as the food body, is called the Annamaya kosha. Slightly more subtle than that is the Pranamaya kosha. That's relates more to, I believe, the etheric double in theosophy, because it is where all the subtle energy systems of yoga are housed, like the chakras and nadis, etc. And a little more subtle than that is called the Manomaya kosha, and that's the mental processes. Somewhere in between the Pranamaya and Manomaya kosha is the emotional body, but that's not talked about in the kosha system. So more subtle than that is called the Vijnanamaya kosha, or the intuitive body. And then we go down to the most subtle layer, or the fastest vibrating layer, and that's the Anandamaya kosha, or bliss body, and that relates directly to the Atman, or the soul. Okay, so with that in mind, according to the Theosophical teachings, which are derived from ancient Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, the etheric double is an invisible part of the ordinary, visible, physical body, which it interpenetrates and beyond which it extends a little bit. So they have the primary difference with the yoga system, the modern yoga system, tantric yoga, and Theosophy, is that Theosophy has the etheric double extending outside the physical body, whereas Tantric Yoga has it within the physical body. Yeah, so that's a slight difference, but I think it's still, viable, and it relates. So, so it forms other finer bodies of more commonly known aura. The etheric double is not made of the omnipresent ether, or prana with a big P, of space, but is composed of a physical matter that is thus far in the process of human evolution, invisible to the physical eyes or senses, except to clairvoyance. Of course, if you're clairvoyant, then you may be able to perceive the etheric double. The term double is used because the etheric double is an exact replica of the denser physical body. The sense organs of the etheric double are the chakras, and it is through the chakras that the physical body is supplied with the streams of vitality necessary for its existence and well-being during life. This is a quote. Without the etheric double as a bridge to convey undulations of thought and feeling from the astral to the visible, denser physical matter, the ego could make no use of the cells of the brain. To the clairvoyant, the etheric double is clearly visible as a mass of faintly luminous violet gray mist, interpenetrating the denser part of the physical body and extending very slightly beyond it. The etheric double thus plays the part of a conductor or bridge between the physical and astral bodies. For without it, humans could have no communication with the astral world, and hence neither thoughts nor feelings. The astral plane is considered to be the fourth dimensional reality, which relates to the podcast we did on the different planes of existence, Barbara Hanklow's work, from which the physical material world manifests. It's important to understand that the physical world is like a manifestation of the astral world. The astral world is the realm of myths and archetypes through which the personal and collective unconscious interacts to form the foundation of our day-to-day experience. Those who have claimed experience of lucid dreaming, astral projection, and other out-of-body travel state that the etheric or astral body is connected to the physical body by a subtle, infinitely extensible cord that is silvery in nature. Aside from their specialized use, in theosophy, the terms etheric double and etheric body are often, but not always, used synonymously with the astral body. As far as the chakras go, they reside in the etheric double, which is currently believed to relate directly to the fascial system in the human body. Fascial system is a three-dimensional network of connective tissues that surrounds and interpenetrates every part of the body. So essentially it's the interconnecting medium within the human body. So it's analogous to space in that way, because space is the thing that interconnects all material reality. So this is a nice example of the second Hermetic principle, as above, so below. So we can see how the human physical body has the same thing within it that material reality on a larger scale has with space. So, and it makes sense that the, more subtle energy would be present in that part.
Right.
Yeah, because of that. I think that pretty much covers it. So essentially, the chakras are housed in the etheric double.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting when I was studying this, how you were saying that in some forms of this philosophy that they combine the astral or the etheric double and they see it as the same thing. But when I started to study this, I'm like, it's absolutely not the same thing.
I don't think it is either.
And so I appreciate them for saying it. There might be a subtle difference, but just based on the disintegration, the etheric double disintegrates a lot faster. And this is where we get like the churchyard ghosts and things like that. And
Right.
it leaves this kind of
residue.
Yes, but the astral body can live for a lot longer after the person has crossed over, and we don't necessarily see it lingering on the physical plane. So I'm like, these are absolutely two different things. I think they work together.
They do. And I think people, most people are just now beginning to get a rudimentary understanding of these things. So anything that's subtle energy, they're going to kind of lump it into a similar category, So,
yeah, I'm just glad that somebody was like, actually, these are two different things. Because when I was looking into it, I'm like, absolutely, there is a little bit of a division there. Okay.
Absolutely.
So could you define and explain for us the vital force and the serpent fire and how these connect with the chakras?
Okay. So the vital force and the serpent fire are two completely different things. They are two of the various types of energy. In Leadbeater's words, the deity sends forth from himself into creation. So they're God energy manifest in physical reality, essentially different forms of God energy. You can think of the deity as that which has created all reality as we understand it. God, goddess, source, what have you. The third Hermetic principle of vibration states that everything vibrates, everything moves, nothing rests. As the most fundamental level, the universe and everything which comprises it is pure vibratory energy, manifesting itself in different ways. The universe has no solidity as such. Matter is energy in a state of vibration. So these two types of energy or vibration are two that have been identified and that some information isn't known about. The first Hermetic principle also states that another Hermetic principle that the all is mind and the universe is mental. So everything in the universe is essentially a form of energy that is either manifest at a really dense level, which forms matter, or highly energetic level, which forms other things like thought and emotion. At the most basic level, the way that the varying forces weave together and function is extremely complex. So it requires significant study to understand it. But the vital force, also known as prana, with a big P, is a more cosmic masculine energy. It flows down into the human body from the sun, or solar deity, Surya, Sol, Helios. Those are some of the names of the solar deity, by way of what are known as vitality globules, which we'll talk about more later. Leadbeater talked about vitality globules being composed of 7 atoms charged with prana, which are seen by the clairvoyant as having different colors. Each of the 7 atoms: violet, blue, yellow, green, rose, orange, and red. I would say that these likely relate to the 7 rays, which is another podcast in and of itself.
I would love to do a podcast on that.
Yeah, we may do that sometime. That'd be fun. So when the globule is absorbed by the body through the breath, it is decomposed in the spleen. So the spleen in Leadbeater's chakra system is of utmost importance. It relates to the sacral or Svadhisthana chakra in modern yoga terminology. He calls it the spleen center, and he doesn't have a Sanskrit name for it, interestingly enough. So these streams flow through the different chakras and circulate around the body, giving energy to the various organs. So Leadbeater associates the 5 streams with the 5 pranas in Hinduism, and we'll talk about that more later. So essentially, the vitality or the vital force comes from the external world out in space, down to earth and into the human body, whereas the serpent fire, which is commonly known as Kundalini or Kundalini Shakti, is a more material, feminine energy that flows up from the core of the earth. Interestingly, before I actually knew that was the case, according to philosophy, I used to think of Kundalini. A lot of times they talk about it being housed in, Muladhara or deep in the root chakra area. But it actually the source of it is actually the interior, the core of the earth, and it moves up into Muladhara and is stored there. So it's not necessarily generated there, it's just stored there,
right,
to be stimulated by the vitality at some point. And when woven together, it creates this type of evolutionary energy and can help to expand and grow consciousness over time. So the root chakra, where it's essentially waiting pranic stimulation to begin its action and movement through the body via the chakras. So fascinatingly, the blending of these forces within the human body creates a subtle energetic form, the upper half, which bears remarkable resemblance to the Hindu Shiva Lingam. Have you ever seen a Shingalingam?
I have. Yeah.
Excuse me, a Shiva Lingam. Yeah, so an emblem of creative power, revered by the Shaivites, the people who revere Shiva. It is believed the invisible lower half of the lingam symbolically extends down into the earth to the same extent that it rises above. So the Shiva lingam essentially represents the Kundalini Shakti at the bottom and the vitality at the top, and how they're interwoven together within the human body to create the energy that is responsible for the evolution of consciousness. Essentially, it stimulates the evolution of human consciousness through the awakening of each of the chakras. So essentially vitality is cosmic and serpent fire Kundalini is earth-based, and they meet together within the human body.
All right.
Yeah.
I've seen in some, I think even Theosophical works, they kind of warn against not forcing the Kundalini to rise. What are your opinions? Because I feel like a lot of people do practices specifically aimed at awakening it instead of allowing it to sort of awaken in its own time. Why do you think there's warnings about it?
Yeah, I think it's extremely difficult to awaken it before it's ready, but if it does, it represents like this tremendous force of evolutionary energy that could cause someone to essentially lose touch with reality,
Right.
Because they just haven't developed their consciousness to the point to where they could actually receive it. And it could, in addition to that, burn out the physical body in many ways as well. So you're right, particularly like Kundalini yoga and, some of the pranayamas are specifically designed to stimulate Kundalini. But at the same time, I think that's actually pretty rare where somebody would get it stimulated to the point to where it would rise enough to create any kind of problems. But it could, certainly.
Right.
So you got to be cautious about it.
Right. Because I did Kundalini yoga for years of my life, and I didn't feel like I had a break, but I was so dedicated to the practice that I was living in my life harmoniously with the practices. And but I guess I have met some people that seem to practice things like this and they're so ungrounded and they have a hard time like keeping a job and like living in the real world. I feel like they've kind of pried certain chakras open instead of letting the force just kind of move naturally.
Yeah. I've often wondered if people who have like psychotic breaks from reality and things like that have had a Kundalini rising.
Right.
And it, just overwhelmed them and they couldn't cope with, how they were perceiving reality at that point.
Right. Because I've read that it can happen spontaneously. So if the person has no vocabulary, and no teacher or anybody around them that knows what's going on, they might see that as like this person's going insane.
Certainly.
And because there's no language for it, what's going on.
No, and no, perceptual base to pull from,
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, it's a tough one. But I in all the years that I've been teaching yoga, I've never seen it happen one time.
Right.
So, it's pretty rare.
Yeah. I feel like there's a connection to the past lives. Like if you are prepared for something like that, it will happen. And a lot of times the person has already been doing work over many lifetimes in order to get to that point in this lifetime.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, it's something that takes tremendous amount of internal work to even get close to it.
Right.
So for it to rise unnaturally would require some type of extraordinary event.
Right.
Like a extreme trauma or possibly a drug overdose could potentially cause that.
Right.
But
Kind of force it.
it would take a lot. Yeah.
All right. So in the book, he talks about the 3 spinal channels. So could you kind of explain what he's referring to there?
Yeah. The 3 spinal channels are the primary, what are called nadis in the human body. The nadis relate to, for people that know about Chinese medicine, they relate somewhat to the meridians in Chinese medicine through which the qi or ki flow. In yoga philosophy, qi or ki is termed prana. And this is prana with a small p. So once prana enters the human body, it becomes specific to a human body. While it's out in the external environment, it is available for anyone and everyone to use. So the 3 channels, the primary one that runs the length of the spinal column and is directly in the center of the spinal column is called Sushumna Nadi. And then on either side of that are the Ida and Pingala nadis. So Sushumna Nadi is the channel through which the serpent fire, the Kundalini Shakti, flows to either side of Sushumna. So they weave in and out of the chakras as they make their way up toward the crown of the head, and they meet at the brow, or what's known as Ajna chakra, are the secondary channels, so Ida and Pingala. Though they weave across each side of the body, Ida is considered to be primarily associated with the left side, lunar dynamics and feminine energy, the element water. While Pingala is on the opposite, right side, solar dynamics, masculine energy, and the element of fire. So we can work directly with Ida and Pingala through the practice of Nadi Shodhana, also known as alternate nostril pranayama. And then, like we were talking about with Kundalini, you can stimulate Kundalini through certain pranayama practices like Bhastrika or Kapalabhati pranayama, but you've got to, like we said earlier, you got to be really careful with that. So you don't want to just dive into doing a hardcore pranayama practice before you've kind of cleared and purified the body with asana. A lot of people make the mistake of not doing enough asana before they start these other practices, and it kind of overwhelms them psychologically.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily cause Kundalini to rise prematurely, but it can cause you to get really dissociated from reality and ungroundedness, like you talked about earlier. I see that happen quite a bit with people, particularly those that practice Kundalini yoga, because there's a tremendous amount. They do what's called breath of fire, and it's a form of Bhastrika pranayama, and it can highly stimulate your emotional body.
Right.
So yeah, you got to be cautious, and you got to be ready to deal with what comes up, and that's what happens with a lot of people. They bring up this trauma from the unconscious mind, down in the shadow realm of the unconscious mind, and they're not prepared to deal with it, and it can completely cause a dissociation from reality.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely kind of hallucinated doing breath of fire. I mean, I'm not saying a hallucination like the same with like mushrooms or something, but like as I'm doing it, I get like these visuals of certain things. Like I've done the white tantra with another person, and as we were doing these breaths together, like they would like morph. Like I could see these different versions of this person, and but I was grounded in my practice, so it didn't scare me. But I feel like that would freak somebody out if they were,
well, of course,
just heavy breathing with a bunch of people they didn't know, and then they start to see this dude's past life. But
and a lot of times in those classes, they'll just bring raw beginners in and have them do that stuff right off the bat.
Right.
It can be very unsettling. So
right, because they're not well versed in, like you said, the asana. You want to be embodied before you really start to kind of blast off and start to do.
Absolutely. That's why asana practice is so important, because it definitely grounds you, and it definitely gets you, like you said, embodied and highly conscious of your physical body. So you've got something to latch onto as your mind is like exploding into alternate realms.
Right. You see a lot of these yogis that, like, even I think an autobiography of a yogi, his Yogananda's teacher, he's meditating, he's very grounded, but he's projecting his astral body out into the world. Oh, yeah. But he's very rooted in his physical body where he's at. Mm-hmm. And it's because he's so grounded that he can extend his self in that way. And it really is a balance of both, feet on the ground, head in the clouds. Like you have to have the groundedness in order to really successfully project.
If you project without that, then you totally lose touch with reality, and
right.
you can lose touch with your own consciousness as well.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think the caduceus, the symbol of that, represents the 3 spinal channels in some way?
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about that. I think maybe it did at one time. Mm-hmm. In ancient times, that's Hermes' staff, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, I think yes, absolutely. Now, the modern medical interpretation of that is
Right. They
they've
picked the
warped
wrong.
it.
They picked the wrong caduceus.
Yeah.
Because it should be Asclepius's staff, which
Yeah.
would be and that's what they use in Europe. But they, I guess, just picked a staff with snakes going up it, which Asclepius's has the snakes too.
Yeah.
But he's actually connected to medicine, so it makes sense. But Mercury's not really connected to.
No, definitely not.
So, but I was just thinking like the rod would be like the
Sushumna
Sushumna,
Nadi, yeah.
and then the two serpents would be the Ida and Pingala.
Yeah, totally. And then they connect where they connect at brow. The reason the wings are there is because your mind at that point can expand into the the other realms once those connect and the Kundalini rises up to that point.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would make sense with Mercury being like the messenger, because it's like once you do these practices, these three channels are kind of coming together and bridging, and it's almost like the information would flow more freely, kind of like Mercury being like a psychopomp, able to go back and forth between the different realms. But it's like this myth is an example of something that actually goes on within us, when all of these things are working harmoniously and activated. So
yeah, and the alternate nostril breathing is something that somebody new in yoga can go ahead and start practicing at a really basic level. And it's very helpful to clear those channels because it allows it's kind of like you've got to clear those before you can really get to Sushumna.
right.
So I actually occasionally will do alternate nostril breathing with my classes at Renegade. And people seem to really love it and connect with it. So it's a powerful practice. Yeah, the Ida and the Pingala aren't quite as energetically potent, I guess you'd say, as the Sushumna Nadi. So they're a gentler access into the subtle realms. So it's a great practice to start with, rather than starting with something like Bastrika or Breath of Fire or Kapalabhati Pranayama, which can be, super intense and can really unground a person if they're not, totally present in their physical body. Yeah.
So do you feel like the breath work, the vitality obviously comes from the sun, but do you feel like the breath work helps us kind of move that vitality through us in some way? Because we are talking about prana, and when you're doing the breath, you're kind of moving prana around. So do you think it's connected to the vital force as far as like somehow facilitating it in some way?
Well, what happens is with, particularly with a specific type of pranayama, which a lot of people in modern yoga are practicing, not really knowing exactly what it is, Ujjayi breath. What happens is there's a subtle energetic filter in the back of the throat, and that's one of the reasons that we create that sound with the breath, with Ujjayi. It's like... So breathing that way, what it does is it filters prana to purify it, because not only prana is present in the external environment with other things as well. So when you breathe that way, it purifies it into a more refined form, and so it becomes much more highly active in the body because of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's something a lot of people don't realize. I think they're just making the sound to kind of create a meditative state, which happens, but there's actually a subtle energetic component going on there as well. That's really effective.
So could you explain how we absorb vitality and how does it affect our physical health?
Yeah. Okay, this is an interesting question because vitality has to get into the physical body, right? It's in the external environment and it has to get in some way. So from the yogic perspective, it obviously comes in through breath. We know that for sure. But there's another practice that was, and Leadbeater doesn't mention this, because I don't think that it was known about in his time, but it was recently discovered about 20 years ago. It's a practice called sun gazing. So you can actually absorb vitality directly through the eyes into the Ajna chakra. So that's another way of getting it into the body. And then also, I believe that it will come down through crown as well, particularly if it's, if crown is more, developed and close to being fully awakened. So again, we went over this earlier. The vitality is known as prana with a capital B, or universal prana before it enters the body. And then it becomes prana, kind of a personalized prana with a lowercase p when it enters. Once it enters into the body, it is subdivided into what are known as the 5 vayus. So vayu is translated as internal winds. So these types of prana subdivided into the body create different types of actions and govern different types of processes within the physical body. So the 5 are called prana, apana, udana, samana, and vyana vayus. Leadbeater seems to imply that the spleen center, or Svadhisthana, absorbs the vitality globules. So when we're talking about breathing in prana, like doing pranayama, Leadbeater more highly refines the prana into what are called vitality globules. So he can actually perceive the individual units of prana. And he's saying that those come into the body, into the spleen. I don't know that they're absorbed directly at the spleen. I think they come in through one of the ways that I mentioned earlier, through the breath or the eyes or the crown, and then they work their way down Sushumna Nadi to the spleen, where they're subdivided at that point.
Distributed.
Yeah. So that's how they kind of get into the body. Once they're in, they have different colors that they become. So there's a violet blue ray, and that relates to the throat, the head, and the brain. So Vishuddha chakra, which is throat chakra, Ajna chakra, which is brow, and then Sahasrara chakra, which is the crown chakra. And the violet blue ray corresponds to what's called Udana Vayu. So Udana Vayu is upward moving, subtle energy. The second color is yellow, and that relates to the heart, Anahata chakra, and Pranavayu. So Pranavayu is the initial inhale of prana from the external world into the body. Then there's a green ray, and that represents the abdomen and the solar plexus area. So it vivifies or adds life to the liver, the kidneys, and the intestines, and digestion overall. It relates to the Manipura chakra and what's known as Samanavayu. Then there's the rose color, and that circulates through the entire body. It feeds the etheric double, and it relates to the spleen center, or Svadhisthana chakra. Again, Leadbeater doesn't name that chakra, but in modern yoga terminology, it's known as Svadhisthana. It also relates to Vyanavayu, which is a circulatory energy that moves throughout the entire body. And then there's an orange-red ray, and that relates to the sexual generative organs, and it also enters the blood to keep heat in the body, which is interesting because that relates to the core of the earth as well. Now, this is the energy that can stimulate Kundalini to rise. So once it moves down into Muladhara, if the person has done enough, how can I say this, like renunciate type practices, where they're resisting the urges of what's called the lower nature, which is the part of us that wants to engage in hedonistic type behavior. So if we become more purified, not only in the physical body, but with thought, action, things like that, then over time we have a chance to take this energy that moves down into the sexual region, transform it to stimulate Kundalini to rise up through the chakras and stimulate the evolutionary energy.
Right, so we're taking that primal energy and giving it direction instead of letting it kind of control us.
Yeah.
We're taking control with our will to say this is where we want to put this energy.
Yes.
So it's like we have that power, but it comes from being a conscious human being, because the average person doesn't even realize that that's a thing. So you almost have to have some kind of spiritual knowledge, because why would you?
Why would you even want to do that? Because all those things are fun to do,
right?
You know, and that most people think that those are the joys of life, right. You know. So why would you want to suppress that necessarily? But there's it's kind of like you finally get to the point where you've had enough of that, and you're like, there's something more. I know there's something more, and I want to do whatever I can to tap into that potentially. So you will start to kind of. I don't know if repress or suppress is the right word, but at least to try to work with more consciously, like you said, right. You know, so
have you ever seen the vitality globules? Can you see them on a cloudy day? Or I can see them against the blue sky.
Yeah. If the sunlight's really bright, right. Yeah, I think I have seen. So I don't see the colors necessarily, but I can definitely see something.
Right.
That is, materializing and is really small. So yeah, that's really interesting.
In the book, it talks about it, and when I was a little kid, that's when I first noticed them, because I'd watched James and the Giant Peach, and there was the little glowworm things, and I was like, the little glowworms are in the sky. Yeah. But on days where it was really, really sunny, they would move very fast, and there was a lot of them everywhere. But when it was overcast, I would still see them, but it's like they would
slower.
Move slow. But it makes sense because they are connected to the sun.
Yeah.
That when the sun is out and shining, that it actually charges them more, and they move quicker. But yeah, I've been able to see these my whole life. But when I was reading the Etheric Double book, I was like, oh, this is what I'm seeing.
That's what I've been seeing.
There's a name for this. And, so yeah, a lot of people can see them if they just unfocus their eyes and look, on a clear day at the sky.
I think going through the process of sun gazing kind of awakened my internal sight to those a little bit, because I did that all the way up to 38 minutes. So
and you almost have to unfocus your eyes to do that. So it's
because when you do sun gazing, you have kind of like a half open eyes, so it's a really soft gaze, and
almost like the drishti. Is that what it's called, where you kind of look beyond?
Yeah, it's called nazigra drishti. So you're gazing out across the tip of your nose at the sun. So you are looking at it, but you're kind of more in your peripheral vision.
Right, you're letting it enter without directly letting it hit the retina.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, if you are thinking about practicing sun gazing after listening to this podcast, there are 2 times of day where it's safe to look at the sun, and that would be conservatively 30 minutes. So after sunrise, up to 30 minutes after sunrise. So that little window in there, exact point of sunrise to 30 minutes afterward. If you want to be a little bit more, in East Tennessee, because there's so many hills and things like that, sometimes it's really hard to see the sun the first 30 minutes after it rises. So you can push it to an hour. So there's like a 30-minute or an hour window from sunrise to an hour afterwards. And then the same with sunset. So an hour or 30 minutes before sunset to sunset, the effect of the sun's rays won't damage your eyes at that point. And I'm living proof that works, because I did it all the way up to 38 minutes. They suggested to go to 45, and I was like, once I got to 38, I'm like, wow, man, I was just staring directly at the sun for 38 minutes.
Right, and they act like that's impossible.
Yeah. And I thought, man, I'm not going to do that anymore. I think that was enough.
Right. You learned what you needed to learn from it.
Yeah. And it definitely, I believe it decalcified my pineal gland very effectively. That's one of the biggest problems with people actually perceiving these subtle energetic things, is that our pineal glands are calcified through, various things that we've done in life, one of the primary things is the use of fluoride. So if you are using fluoride in your toothpaste and you want to see the vitality globules, you got to get rid of that.
And they're drinking it, which is even worse than just the
Yeah.
occasional treatment. It's like you're drinking it every day, you're showering in it, you're
Yeah.
just drilling yourself. And if you think about, like, you're out here sun gazing, well, most people are wearing sunglasses and covering their body in sunscreen, and so they're putting like a barrier around themselves where, I
To
mean,
not absorb the vitality.
right. So I guess they're
Yeah.
mostly just getting it through the food.
Yeah.
You know, or just the, casual breathing that they're doing.
Yeah, I would say that people that are that cautious with their bodies in the sun are probably not eating that great food with high levels of vitality in it either, so they're probably not getting a whole lot, and that's definitely going to lead to illness. And you think it's because of the the effect of the sunlight, but it's actually it's not getting enough vitality from the sunlight is
Right.
the problem. That's what causes
Right,
the
because when
poor
your
health.
vital force is strong,
Yeah.
then it can it basically helps you maintain homeostasis, and you kind of self-heal.
Yeah.
But if the vital force is weak because it's not getting the proper food or the breath or the sun, it's hard. I mean, I don't know how those people I mean, a lot of people do live this kind of droopy, unenergized life, though. You see them, they're kind of in a daze, and I feel like it's because their vitality is just so low.
Well, look at plants that are in, areas where they're not getting sunlight.
Right.
They droop.
And they're sad.
And
They look sad.
And they start to lose vitality.
Right.
Because they're literally not receiving vitality
Right.
from the sun. So
Yeah, we can definitely learn a lot from
Yeah.
plants.
no doubt about it.
So, all right. So we've talked about all this dense information, and I feel like with a lot of these spiritual topics, people, they hear it, it's one ear and out the other because they don't know how to apply any of it. So what are some practical ways that people can connect with this kind of information and work with it?
Well, obviously, the first thing that I would suggest is developing a dedicated, consistent yoga practice. A yoga practice, like we said earlier, the physical aspect of yoga asana tends to really ground you so that you do have the potential to expand into deeper layers of awareness. So, but, a lot of people are intimidated by the physical practice, and I think it's really important that people understand that there's much more to yoga than that. And, in the modern world, we've gotten this idea that that's all that yoga is performing a series of postures. But
Right.
that's a misconception. The Theosophists would call that a glamour. Glamour. And that, that's something that's permeating the world today, and it leads people to believe that there's only one way to do yoga. So there are many different avenues through which a state of yoga can be reached, and posture is one of them. I think it would be important to define the word yoga. Word yoga is derived from the Sanskrit yug, Y-U-G, or Y-U-J, and it directly translates as to yoke or to unite. So how this root meaning manifests in a yoga practice is strictly dependent upon the perception and interpretation of each individual. For some people, it may mean to feel more unified or whole within themselves, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. For others, practicing yoga might bring about a deeper connection with their family and friends, their community, or potentially with a higher power. And it could be a combination of these things or something else entirely. But regardless of how it manifests, I would say that each yoga practice session tends to bring a renewed sense of internal harmony, which often externalizes into the world around us. So what's going on within us is reflected into our outer world. So that's kind of what we experience in the external world. So if we can harmonize our internal world, then that tends to draw experiences and people and relationships into our lives that are more harmonious for us. So yoga, as far as the practice itself goes, I mean, in addition to asana, there's also the practice of pranayama, which we talked about earlier, breath control or manipulation. There's meditation. There's mantra, which is a repeated phrase or word that helps induce meditation. There's chanting. Chanting is a powerful thing that a lot of people don't really think of as yoga necessarily, but it's in my opinion, it's maybe one of, if not the most powerful form of yoga, because what it does is it like directly aligns you with a certain vibratory quality that's present in material reality. So like a lot of the Hindu gods and goddesses, they have a particular name, and the reason they're named this thing is because when the word is said or chanted, it creates a very specific vibratory quality. And that particular word symbolizes an underlying aspect of reality. Like, for example, Ganesha is the remover of obstacles. So if you chant to Ganesha, essentially what you're doing is you're aligning your personal vibration with the vibratory quality of removing obstacles just in general. So it harmonizes you with this really profound, fundamental, universal dynamic. And the same with like Lakshmi. Lakshmi is the goddess of abundance and prosperity. So if you want more of that in your life, then if you chant or listen to chants about Lakshmi or dedicated to Lakshmi, then that'll align your consciousness with that part of reality. It's super powerful. And a lot of people don't realize that, and they don't take full advantage of it. There's also another form of yoga called kirtan, and it's like a little concert that you can participate in, and it tends to make people really highly energetic and happy. It's just got this underlying positive vibration to it, and it's really, really, really powerful. So there are many ways of doing yoga. I mean, you can align each day you can align your thoughts with a sense of gratitude. We all have something to be grateful for. And fundamentally our lives, just in general, and then, rather than saying something like, oh man, I've got to go to work today, or I've got to work out, I've got to prepare my meals and eat well, say I get to, I get to experience life. I have the opportunity to live, and we take it for granted because we've become accustomed to it, but it's really profound thing just to have life and the experience of living. So a practice of gratitude is one way. I mean, you can scrape your tongue or pull oil for oral hygiene. You can clear your respiratory passages with neti pot practice. You can take time to focus on your daily intentions, like, intentionally working on manifesting your life. You can journal, to bring your internal world to the external world. There are many different things you can do, but the important thing essentially is to weave a state of ritual and ceremony into your day-to-day life that honors the gift of life and intentionally dedicates it to an increasingly refined sense of well-being and interconnection. I mean, that's what yoga really is. Right. It's like finding something that does that for you, and doing it regularly, so it becomes, a ritualistic aspect of your life. Anything that you do repeatedly like that over and over tends to create like this fundamental change in your psyche over time.
So would that be like the bhakti yoga, which is more like the devotion? Like the devotion itself is a form of yoga?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That would definitely be a form of devotional yoga. So you're devoting yourself to your own self-improvement, essentially. Bhakti is also, dedicating or recognizing love of a guru.
Okay.
right, as well. But it could also be, the
Like
love of God.
if you're the guru.
If you're your own
you-
guru, then you can love yourself,
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really love this breakdown because I think that most of the population probably just associates yoga with the postures. So it is more of a lifestyle. It is a way of living that is harmonious, And so I love how you're making those connections because I feel like it's really hard for people to understand that it's not just stretching.
Yeah, a lot of people, I have people say to me all the time, well, I can't practice yoga because I'm stiff.
Right.
I'm like,
All the time. And I'm not even a yoga teacher to hear that all the time.
can you scrape your tongue? Can you write something in a book each day? Can you sit quietly for 5 minutes?
Right.
There's so many different ways that you can begin to connect with this internal sense of harmonizing with the present moment. I just wish people didn't think that the only avenue of yoga was posture, because a lot of people are really intimidated by it.
Right.
And it's not the entry point for everyone.
No.
Eventually you're probably going to want to do some form of posture. You can do restorative posture. You don't have to do power yoga.
Right.
You don't have to be in a 110-degree room somewhere, doing hot yoga. You can just do yin yoga, which is gentle, or restorative yoga. Anything like that, where you're doing something that enlivens and begins to heal and harmonize your physical body. So that's what asana means, essentially, not necessarily grinding out 2 hours of power yoga. I say that, I teach that,
Right. It's a form.
It's a form, and it's a great form, but it's only for, it's not for everyone necessarily.
Right.
Another way of connecting with Leadbeater's work is to begin a study of theosophy. Whew.
It's just a lifelong process, really.
Yeah. So it's a daunting task, undoubtedly, but I think when people get intimidated, if they'll start with, Isis Unveiled or The Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky, and they're overwhelmed with the information and the language. You have to, a lot of these things were written, over 100 years ago, almost 200 years ago now. And the language that people were much more efficient and eloquent with the English language in those days. So Blavatsky's writing, it's almost indecipherable for a lot of people, and it contains a tremendous amount of information that is not well known. I would describe it as arcane information, but if you couple it with a dedicated yoga practice, what happens is you begin to gain insight into deeper meaning of the material through a type of reading between the lines insight. It's a form of jnana yoga, and it'll begin to emerge over time. So what happens is you start reading Blavatsky, and the information is so dense that it creates what are called these gaps in thought. And it's actually a type of meditation that your mind will go into. You'll start pondering a subject like infinity, for example, when she's talking about the all, or the absolute. She refers to it as the absolute. And you start thinking about that, and your mind just kind of stops for a second. So what happens is it's actually inducing meditation. And when that happens, you can connect with what I described earlier as the Vijnanamaya kosha, and that's the intuitive body. And sometimes information or understanding will flow into you that you wouldn't have access to normally.
Right.
It's really a beautiful system. So studying theosophy is more than just absolutely learning everything by rote necessarily. It actually engages the intuition as well. Which, another term for that is called gnosis, or inner knowing, intuitive knowledge, intuitive guidance, and understanding. The development of this state of consciousness is an important key to forming a more thorough connection to, the theosophical work, and any type of connection to clairvoyance or subtle energy. Yeah.
I've been really enjoying this YouTube channel. It's called monadic media.
Yeah.
And I found it through Philip Lindsay.
Yeah.
But I really like, there's this guy, William, it's either Meter or Metter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he does a lot of lectures, and I really like how he breaks it down.
Yeah.
And just does an hour lecture on a single topic. And I love Philip Lindsay's work too, because, you know, they're still alive. So they're studying this, but they're presenting it in this really practical way for our era, because, you know, when this was written, the world was a different place. And so it's cool to have a living teacher who has studied it and also applying it in a way that is grounded in the reality that we live in today.
Absolutely.
So, you know, there are a lot of good YouTube, you know, videos and stuff like that. If you want to continue to study, and you're reading a book and you're like, well, what's the serpent fire? You know, I'm sure Monadic Media has a whole video on that, because they break it down. Like, here's the faux hot, here's esoteric astrology, here's how, you know, and it's been great, because sometimes the books get so dense that it's just, I need a living person,
an interpreter,
to talk to me, and it also helps me to stay kind of lit up and excited. And I'm like, oh, well, now I need to get this book, right? Because I don't know, it's good to have some kind of teacher to help instruct you along the way and kind of guide you on to where to go. And that teacher doesn't always have to be someone that you know in the real world. It could be someone that just does, you know, recorded lectures. So there's a lot of good teachers out there. And
the connection to a teacher in that way is a form of bhakti yoga, actually.
Right.
So you develop this love for your teacher, and you can feel like the information flowing through them into you.
Right.
It's really powerful. There's another guy, his name's, I think it's Pablo Sender, Sender.
Okay. Yes.
He's
I've seen
really
his videos
good too.
too.
Yeah. I like him quite a bit. He has a way of breaking it down into layman's terms that make it, you know, he has a way of going through it slowly enough, and he has a gift of making it understandable to anyone, I think. You know, you don't have to have like this deep understanding of arcane terminology and, you know, the occult world to get the information really effectively.
Right. And it, like yoga, it's kind of a lifelong study, you know, and it's not something you can just, oh, I read a book and now I'm, you know, a master occultist. It's like, we're always learning something new. And the more we learn, the more it's like, oh, well, the less I know, you know, because like the universe is so grand that there's no way that we could process all the information in one lifetime. So if you just enjoy learning and you're lit up by it, then you're always going to want to continue to expand. So
yeah, absolutely. You know, you can also study yoga philosophy. If you study yoga philosophy, and particularly if you can get into, you know, reading and studying the ancient texts, the further back you go, the more refined the information is in many ways. So, you know, thousands of years ago, they were highly attuned to yogic understanding. So, you know, the Upanishads in particular are, you know, would be a great place to get some really good information. And then there are lots of yogic texts, the Puranas, you know, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. I mean, you know, there are tons of different books that you can study. You don't have to study theosophy necessarily. I mean, you don't even have to practice yoga. You can develop any type of practice that you do consistently, that, you know, hiking, getting out into nature in some way, you know, just deep breathing. I mean, you don't have to do yogic pranayama. You can do anything that brings your attention into the present moment and allows you to harmonize internally to a certain degree, is going to connect you, you know, to a deeper layer or a deeper sheath of the self, you know, a deeper kosha, a more subtle kosha. So that's the path that you want to take. So movement from the external world of form into the internal world of consciousness. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that explanation, and I love all of the practices that you've shared. So,
yeah. So Leadbeater's book overall is, you know, it is super dense. You know, it's packed full of information, you know, and one great thing is that we have access to the internet now.
Right.
So if you can't, if you don't know what one of the words means or whatever, you can look it up and you can find it really easily. So you've got like the world's largest dictionary right at your fingertips on your phone. So you can translate the work.
Right. And just
Pretty
giving
quickly
yourself
and
space
easily.
to integrate it, like not just trying to read as many books as you can, but when you read the book, to read it at this steady pace so that as you're reading it and you're developing the concepts, you're really laying down this foundation so that it's sticking. Because I feel like sometimes we get so caught on like wanting to read a certain amount of books in a month because our ego is like, well, the more books I read, the smarter I'm going to be. But when it comes to these spiritual texts, we need to give them space to integrate, to really root in to the core of our being, or it's like it just floats right away. It's like, it doesn't actually become
Take hold.
this grounded knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm only speaking from experience, because I used to just read and read and read and read. But now I'm slowing down. I'm taking more notes. I'm doing research alongside the reading. And I feel like I'm finally grasping the deeper meaning behind, what these books are trying to say. So it helps me a lot more to slow down and to just try to integrate. Even if it's just I'm reading, 5 sentences.
I was gonna
Sometimes
say,
that's all it takes to
yeah.
really hit a whole new level of understanding.
Absolutely. I would say that if you're going to read one of these theosophical books, that you read 1 paragraph a day, and that's it.
Right, and just see, because that's going
yeah.
to stick so much
Yeah.
more. And then, when I read this work and I go out into the world, like my gears are now turning, and I'm like starting to see the world differently and pick up on things that I didn't before. So it's like it activates this wisdom within you, where you start to see these expressions in the outer reality that helps you make sense of the knowledge. So it like goes hand in hand with the external world.
That's what I was talking about earlier. I mean, these works are a form of what's called jnana yoga. That you start pondering these concepts that are maybe completely foreign to you, and it creates these gaps in thinking, and it allows your intuitive body to start to surface into your waking consciousness. So you can really kind of tap into this information that exists on a deeper level.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this amazing 2-part series with us.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was great research. I had to stretch myself on this one quite a bit. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
yeah,
I
thoroughly
think it'll
enjoyed
reach a lot of people.
I hope so.
I appreciate all the work that you do and all the wisdom that you share with us. So
Thank you. Leadbeater's work on the chakras is by far the most sophisticated that I know of.
yeah.
I don't know. There's tons of books on him, but they're really, really basic. His stuff is it's like the upper echelon of subtle energetic study, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So yeah, super good stuff.
I'm glad you introduced me to him a long time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Astral.
And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.